Welcome to Lincoln Fire and Rescue on 5 City TV. I'm Dale Johnson. Sitting down today with Lincoln Fire Chief Michael Despain, who came to Lincoln in July from Clovis, California, just 9 miles from Fresno. Chief, thank you very much for coming in. This is your 5 City TV debut.
My debut, yeah, absolutely.
You've been on the radio for a couple of times, couple of months. You've been in to share your comments and insight with KFOR.
Yeah.
So
First time here, so thank you for the invite.
You are
Really
very
appreciate it.
welcome. Appreciate you continuing this community commitment, talking to viewers about the excellence of LFR.
Right.
The Chief and I have talked before, as I mentioned, on KFOR radio, and we have covered many things. The Chief today has rushed over here to the studios from 48th and Calvert, a Leadership Lincoln luncheon where a lot of things were talked about, goals and visions and your philosophy on firefighting. We'll try to get as much of that talked about today as we can. I look at the city's growth and it amazes me, Chief. I've been here 31 years and it has grown. The estimate now is between 3,000 and 4,000 people per year, around 265,000 by the 2013 census. And Lincoln operates with 300 or so firefighters at this point. If the community continues this type of growth, what challenges does that present, both for staff and for geography for LFR?
Well, geography is one of the issues that we deal with, so we need good street. So when you talk about what growth how it will impact us, it's like there's a lot of pieces to that. So how does the 911 system work? What is the street network? What are traffic patterns? Where do we position a station? So there's a lot of pieces to that. But you know, the interesting thing is the city grows. One of the things that we're doing is before we make significant investment in growth, we really are going to take a moment here over the next couple of months, starting primarily in January, to bring in a group of citizens to really ask about what levels of service they want and what's important, because we could build the system however they want. Some things are more expensive than others, but we don't want to invest in something that they may not value, and so we want to make sure that we do that. So as we grow, getting the feedback from the community, one of the key things that we do here in the January, February, March is our timeline.
Yeah, those 3,000 to 4,000 people have to live somewhere, and they're stretching the city's limits all the time, and that brings up the question of fire stations, keeping your response time down for the fires and for the ambulances. How do you see placement in the future as the city expands?
Well, again, the first thing we want to do is make sure we're efficient with what we're doing now. So we're refining some processes internally. For example, fire alarms, that we make sure we're not spending too much time and sending too many units to a type of call that may not require the amount of resources we are sending. And when we do that, what we do is we make the resources that are available more available for the next emergency call that comes in. So a call that we don't need to rush to, we can slow down, not put people at risk, not put firefighters at risk. When the call comes in that's an urgent incident, high acuity EMS call, patient cardiac arrest, for example, we've cut a lot of corners. We're already on the street, we're passing by, we're the closest unit, we can zip to it. So not everything we go to needs to be lights and sirens and what we call code 3. So we're right sizing that business model right now, and we're looking at those call types that we go to, so we're not going to too many calls that we don't need to at the speed that we've traditionally been to. That creates a tremendous efficiency in the system. Now, that's good for a while, but it doesn't solve the problem long term. It just kind of gives us a little bit of breathing room for the growth. And with the growth, we have identified locations for some new stations for either moving an existing station to a more ideal location, and also siting locations for new stations to deal with the growth. And finding land is very important, because if you can find the land in the right spot, the right spot is worth $1 million at the end of the day, because it helps us put it in the right spot so we don't build too soon or have to build too many fire stations too close. They're very pricey. So if we find the right location, even if we don't need it for many years, to land bank, if you will, so that we kind of stake our claim before the growth gets around it and it becomes harder to acquire the land. In some cases, it's not so much a question of money, it's just availability. And we don't want to lose those prime spots. So those are the things that we're doing for growth.
But it's always a question of money.
It's always a question of money.
If money wasn't an object, Chief, I asked this question to the police chief. If money wasn't an object, there are 300 or so firefighters right now. What should Lincoln be what would you like to bring that staff level up to match what is almost a 300,000 population city?
Right. Well, let me start off with, if money wasn't an object, we'd have one on every corner, and we'd have very good response times, very good time on CPR for cardiac arrest. We'd have a lot of advantages, but kind of in a practical mode, if we said, what's the best practice? Where should we be kind of using industry best practices? The number moves a little bit for a couple of reasons. One is reaching back to the community that we'll do, and we'll start the kind of the ask for volunteers to step up. But in January, February, March, when we do the citizen stakeholder group, we will ask them what level of service you want, because that dictates that service level, the staffing level, that drives that heavily. I don't know that I'm worried about people coming in saying, I want my response times lower, I don't want as many fire stations. I really don't see that. But when you talk about growth, we need to have a kind of a courageous conversation about when do we build a station, when do we staff it, and when do we add that personnel for that group. So a good example would be if I asked everybody, do you want faster response times? Do you want to, we get there in about 6 minutes now, do you want it in 5? Do you want it in 4? They'll all raise their hand, but if I told you what that cost you, maybe that's not what they want to do. And so once we ask the question about levels of service, best practices, what is the outcome? Then we'll know better where that staffing is. I can tell you right now, though, I need 19 paramedics yesterday for the need within at least the EMS side, and there is a bleed over. So when I bolster the EMS side, it bolsters the fire suppression side. They kind of drift back and forth a little bit for efficiency, but that's one of the struggles we have right now is hiring at a pace equivalent to what we're losing. So allocated staffing is just under 300 right now. I could hire 19 today, put them on the streets today, and within a couple of weeks I'll have another one gone and another person will leave, and we'll need to fill those positions. So, but rough numbers is probably about 30. We're about 30 positions short of where I think the community will want, but we need to ask the question before we commit to that.
To me, that's acceptable to only be 30 short. The Chief Blymeister said that in a perfect world, he's 150 police officers short at 230 officers on the street. So police officers are doing a great job, and that's often the conundrum with someone who does a job well. They make it look easy.
Right.
And so you assume that everything is fine, but it's like a duck under the water. Those feet are really paddling to make it work.
Yeah, and that's probably the story of Lincoln Fire and Rescue right now is we have some really good people, and I'll use some rough numbers so people can understand. In some communities, the cost for fire protection, you could break it down in cost per capita. So per person, what's it cost? In Lincoln, it's about $112 per person for your fire and EMS protection. And the national average is about $148 to $150. Some agencies in Nebraska are about $200 per person. So we're about half the cost. Mm-hmm. But when you look at performance, what are you getting for your $100, or what are you getting for your $200? There's some data that we can do to say we can derive to say here's the level of performance. So cardiac survival rate is one that we use quite a bit. The national average for that $100, $150, $200, your cardiac survival rate may be all over the board. More money doesn't necessarily mean a better outcome, and that's what we want to do is make sure that we provide the best outcome we can. Right now, cardiac survival rate in Lincoln is running about 70%. And that means if you have a heart attack of the type that you can survive from, because some you can't, there's nothing you can do. But if it is of the type you can survive, in Lincoln right now, your chances of survival is almost 70%, meaning you'll walk out of the hospital equal to how you were before the cardiac event. In other agencies, it's more like 20. And the national average is probably closer to 20. In agencies where I came from earlier, it was hovering around 7. And so it's 10 times the benefit for less money in Lincoln. And so that's that. We're lucky we have people that work hard, and they like you said, above the water, they make it look smooth. But behind the scenes, we're struggling a little bit. So those are the challenges that, my job is to help fix some of those, and we're starting our way through that.
You and I have talked about ambulance rates.
Right.
Recently, ambulance rates were examined to see how they fit into the scheme of things. Talk about what surprised me when you said this, that it was difficult to find a model out there
Right.
similar to the rate structure of Lincoln.
Yeah. Well, in most agencies throughout the United States, let's say, even if it's a private ambulance, the model is it never really pays for itself wholly. So there's a local government, county government subsidy to the program to make it work. In some agencies, they provide X amount of money for fire and EMS. They provide the service. If they don't recoup a dime, they would still provide the service. So the ambulance side tries to recoup the best they can, but what they don't get, it's, hey, we did the best we could, but they provide a very consistent level of service. Here, our EMS service depends on being kind of firewalled between the general fund and what we call an EMS enterprise fund. The fees pay for itself. So the ambulance is not paid for by taxpayer money. The maintenance, the fuel, the bodies that are on there are not taxpayer money. That's paid for by fees. And so that makes it much harder for us to provide the service because the healthcare in the United States is not fair. We charge more to one group because they can pay, because the other group won't pay or can't pay, or pay significantly below what it takes to operate that unit. And so to find comparable agencies so we can compare apples to apples is almost impossible. We went out literally hundreds of miles in all directions to look for agencies, and the closest we came to was an agency in Texas that is still subsidized, but it's close. It was a close model. But at the end of the day, the fees are based on a more reasonable, what's the market rate. So we did do that apples to apples, but we can't compare what we do here in Lincoln to really any other agency.
So it's
very
fair
unique.
to say then, those who pay their bills, like me recently, those who pay their bills make up for those who don't pay.
Exactly. Now, before you talk bad about Lincoln Fire and Rescue ambulance service and their fees,
Oh, you won't get any bad comments from this guy.
Right.
I have praises
Understand
for
that's how
LFR.
healthcare works across the board. That's how the hospital works. That's how the ER works. Your doctor works that way. It's across the board. After out of hospital care works that way. That's the system, and it's unfortunately, I wish we could fix it, but it's a national issue, not a. It's a national issue that needs to be fixed at the national level. We are doing probably the best of any agency I know of to right-size it at the local level, but because now you paid for a service, and even though that cost may be pricey compared to some other things that we do in life, it wasn't subsidized by taxpayers. So in some agencies, you might pay the same amount for your ambulance ride, but you also paid for taxes on the other side to help subsidize it. We're much cleaner in that, and so that's one of the things that we can say. But the problem with the EMS 911 ambulance service across the United States is we kind of use the term, it's the most expensive form of transportation on the face of the earth, next to the space shuttle, mile for mile. The space shuttle is the only thing we found that is more costly per mile for travel. The ambulance ride is a very pricey endeavor, but it's because of the system is broken, and it's the best we can do to put Band-Aids on there.
I don't think the space shuttle could have gotten me to the hospital any faster,
Yeah,
Chief.
I
really
would
don't.
agree with that.
Inmate attacks on staff. There was another one here recently. Not only on staff at correctional institutions, but inmates. That's growing in Nebraska, many of which are in Lincoln, those correctional facilities. State corrections officials recently met with LFR on this matter. Talk a little bit about the strategic operational changes which have been developed between corrections and LFR.
Well, we were very pleased when Director Frakes reached out to us for Department of Corrections to help, kind of look at this problem that was growing. On the surface, there's no procedure, there's no strategy we have to limit the number of calls that we have to the prison. It's the number of calls or the number of calls we have to respond. We have an obligation to do that. What we found was that once we got there, the ability to, in some of the larger compounds, to get all the way into the facility was hindering response time. So for the patient that's injured, they may be sitting in somewhere in the compound waiting an extended time for the ambulance to get to, not only to get to the front gate, but to go through security and get all the way into the facility to reach the patient. The agreement that we have with corrections now is in certain facilities where they have medically trained personnel, is they will continue to treat the patient with their in-house people and try and get them, basically to the fence line, if you will, a secured staging area, so that we're kind of meeting. we make the transition, and so for the patient, it's a faster response time to the hospital. So better patient care, safer for our firefighters, and really better for the system, for the taxpayer that's outside the prison waiting for their next 911 call, because the longer we have a unit tied up, waiting to get into the system, into the facility, get the patient loaded, be secured back out of the facility. There's an area of town that's now underserved. It's dark. There's not an ambulance to serve it. So now what we've done is better for the patient, better for the taxpayer, better for the system, and so that's some of the strategies that we came up with for those facilities.
Chief, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for bringing California weather with you.
Yes, absolutely.
You'll take credit for that?
Yes, absolutely.
We've had some great fall. We had a good summer. We've had some great fall weather.
Yeah.
And so it's always good catching up with you. We
Yeah.
do this on the radio, and now we're doing this on television.
Well, hopefully I'll survive winter, and I'm
You
back
will.
here in the spring. So
You will. We'll
thank
have you back. Lincoln Fire Chief Michael Despain joining me today on 5 City TV.